click wraps, via some sort of landing page approach. You want to get companies in who are set up with your business on some sort of subscription service, and you have a heavy-handed, aggressive legal approach to that customer, where they can't really get out of a contract. They're stuck with you. Is that being a social impact company, a social enterprise company? Is that being the CSR company that we're talking about? Business models don't necessarily match up with what we think about in terms of CSR. So now you've got dropship. If you're an e-commerce company, if you're a clothing retailer, and you're picking up products from China via dropship, you're marking them up 10x, you're selling them online, you're never touching something, you don't have control over the supply chain. Is there a way to have a social enterprise approach to that? We get questions a lot about solar companies. I'm offering products that change the world, that mean something. Well, what is that? If you're not taking care of your employees, does that matter if you're selling a company that or selling a product that maybe does good in the world? But if you're not taking care of your people internally, if you're not taking care of the community, does that mean that you are a corporate social responsibility company? So what we like to kind of take a look at is the triple bottom line business model, that approach to operating a company that looks at the environment, that looks at taking care of all stakeholders, your community, your employees. All these things are very, very important when you're talking about social enterprise, social impact, conscientious capitalism, whatever phrase you want to use. That's kind of the way we want to come at it, rather than using some vague terminology. And so that is where we get into benefit corporations and B Corps. Now, kind of take a step back here. If you want to do a little exercise, close your eyes. This is what I'm getting at, what I'm talking about. So let's say you have a company that your product is plastic glasses, right? So, you're looking around and you go to the eye doctor and they want to sell you a $700 pair of glasses. And you're like, why do they cost so much? And so you're thinking about, how can we be disruptive in this space? How can we offer prescription glasses that are cheaper? And while we're at it, why don't we offer, for every one unit we sell, one unit to some population in a developing place abroad where we can make some impact, make some change. So you've got a groovy idea, you're getting off the ground, very missional oriented founders, a lot of energy, you're attracting people who want to be employees, want to support this mission. And as you're growing, you need some capital. So you start to bring on investors. And over time, as you grow, you need more investors. You start to bring on institutional investors. So maybe you go from Aunt Rita down the block to now you need, some sort of venture capital fund, a pension fund, a hedge fund that are now participating as investors. Well, what can happen is over time, those investors might decide, you know what, that whole one-to-one thing, like, we think the style of your glasses are good enough. We don't need to worry about the one-to-one thing. That's cute and everything, but what we're focused on is, let's just keep selling glasses. Let's get rid of the one-to-one thing. We need to be able to bring more returns to the shareholders. And so when we are talking about benefit corporations, the benefit corporation is a structure that is designed to prevent that from happening. This is a phrase referred to as shareholder primacy. And this is an example of what we're talking about. So early 80s, in a speech around, how can we stimulate investment in companies? This idea of shareholder primacy came about. Well, one way to do that is maybe let's prioritize under the law these investors a little bit more. Why don't we give them a little bit more power? And sort of the grandfather of that idea, 30, 40 years later, said that was the dumbest idea in the world, that we actually pursued that and our economy changed to become a shareholder primacy economy. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, shareholder primacy is the idea that the shareholders of a company are the primary concerns of the company, that the company has to operate in a way to maximize profits to the shareholders. So whether that be a shareholder in terms of a stockholder in a corporation or a member of an LLC, it's the idea that the person who is passively invested in the company has to operate to maximize that return. And so as a result, you get all of these negative things that have occurred over the last 50 years under corporate law. You get quarter decision-making, profit-based parenting, a lot of focus on near term. How do we drive profits? How do we turn out products that make us profits? And if any of you have seen The Social Dilemma, that is what we're getting at. One theme to take away from the Social Dilemma documentary is it's not necessarily the technology, it's not necessarily the people, it's the business model. I think there was a quote in there about it's gotten to a point where it just has to make more and more money and generate more and more revenue back to the investors. And so because of that, you get into some manipulative uses of technology. And that is what shareholder primacy has done. And so the benefit corporation model is a way to try and prevent that from happening. So it is a legal structure that reduces the opportunity for shareholders to sue directors, to sue officers, to say, you can't have this nice maternity policy within your company. You can't prioritize sustainability in the supply chain because that's reducing our profits. The main thing to think about here is that during this sort of evolution of shareholder primacy, CEO employee pay went from about 100 to 1 to 500 to 1 because the CEOs are being rewarded for reducing employee pay, for reducing the benefits and collective participation in the company in favor of the investors. Here's another metric to look at. From the 40s to the 70s, hourly compensation rose about the same rate as productivity. After that, very, very vast difference. Productivity is way up. The employees are not participating. So that's just one aspect of what has happened with shareholder primacy. As a result, B-Lab, in partnership with a lot of key people around the country, developed a model way for a state to incorporate a statute that provides some protection against this from happening. So if you are a startup company, you're looking to launch in some state, maybe you're looking at Delaware, maybe you're looking at your home state, wherever you're operating from, looking at a benefit corporation structure, which is a corporate structure, but has some specific language and processes around providing some sort of public benefit, is something you want to think about. If you may never see this happening, but if you want to make sure that whatever mission and drive you have as an entrepreneur is, and as being a mission-oriented company is, you don't want some investors down the road to come in and kick the legs out from under you or prevent you from growing the way you want to grow. So it's first introduced and adopted by Maryland in 2010. Since then, you've had adoption by, I think, 40 states around the country now. They're not all the same. Now, that's one key thing is there are common features that you're going to see in a benefit corporation statute. There's usually some requirement that you've got to publicly announce, so maybe on your shares it says I'm a PBC or I'm a benefit corporation. And then it breaks down from state to state what sort of the requirements are of what is this benefit. So we've been taking a look recently in our firm, just as sort of a general interest and to promote better laws within our state and some other states in the Southeast, that the way that this benefit corporation legislation has been adopted, just like we're seeing in politics, things are eroded. And so in the Southeast, there's been a far move away from the key tenets of benefit corporation legislation. I wrote a recent article on this where Georgia's new benefit corporation law, you could basically say, I'm a benefit corporation and what I really care about is high school football. And so, we're going to run our company according to improving our local high school football team. And so we're going to have some chili cook-offs and that sort of thing. And we'll be able to go out there and market to everybody that we're a Georgia public benefit corporation, but there's really no public benefit that they're providing. And so it is different state to state what the requirements are. Some states you actually have to state a triple bottom line approach to public benefit. What have you done during the course of the past year to benefit your stakeholders, to consider your stakeholders in decision making, which might be your employees, the environment, your investors, which are just one part of it. And so there are some different things that you're going to have to do according to which state that you're looking at. Millennials are also driving this. You look at the statistics around how millennials are shaping the world. They want to work at a company that is committed to being a good corporate citizen. So there's lots of data out there. That's one of the things that we always talk about, the benefits of becoming a benefit corporation or structuring with key tenets of a triple bottom line business model is attracting talent. Some of the things that you're getting out of this, CBAY at Yale and at Duke, the CASE group, they've produced some really great documentation reports around how, as a social enterprise, you're actually performing better according to the data in terms of your ability to raise money and your ability to be a sustainable company and to outperform and to produce higher returns to your investors when you have this triple bottom line framework. So there's a lot of really great information out there that I'll circulate with some resources after this talk. Here's where you actually kind of see this stuff play out. And so I'm the legal nerd. I'm not going to get too down in the weeds in this, but this is an example of a company that was a benefit corporation, and they had an all profits to nonprofit type of business model. And then they started looking at, well, how can we incentivize board members? We want to have good board members. We're not trying to make them rich, but let's say, we want to give our board members $1,000 a quarter for being directors. Board members can sometimes do a lot. And they were sued because of that, because they were a benefit corporation. And the allegation was that they did not take into account all their stakeholder interests. So this is, really one of the first lawsuits testing the backbone of a benefit corporation. You may not agree with the premise about why this company was sued, but it's just the fact that somebody was armed with the power to do something about it as a stakeholder. States have adopted this. I mentioned this in 40 states. They are different, but generally, you do see a lot of awareness around, well, we have people and companies within our state that want to operate in a certain way, so let's empower them to do so. So something to be very, very positive about. Here's another example of shareholder primacy. eBay, as a minority investor in Craigslist, was able to basically bring suit because the company didn't want to charge for use of the platform. And so there's an example of, hey, we're a shareholder and we see some activity that's going to reduce potential profits to us in this company. So as a late investor, they come on board and they're going to be able to bring suits to challenge what the officers and the directors are doing within the company if it's taking away from their potential returns. Personal example. So I've started companies in many spaces, life science spaces, this law firm. Another one was an interesting company. It was designed to be a social enterprise. Being down here in the South, we have a lot of people who are on septic lines with their sanitation, and a lot of people, especially in Appalachia and rural areas, they don't maintain those lines properly. So what happens is they back up. They have this super, super expensive repair that they have to figure out. They don't have the money for it. The supplies out there are really environmentally hostile products that you can buy typically off the shelf to kind of address this issue to try and maintain your septic line. So we came up with an environmentally friendly product that we wanted to take as a direct-to-consumer kind of play, a la Dollar Shave Club. We didn't really get off the ground too well, but some investors liked sort of our cheeky attitude about it. So the company was called Turdcules. So we had a lot of plays off Turdcules and some funny different advertising and product names. And so the investors came in and wanted to turn that into basically a poo spray type of company. Now, one of our things that we had in this company was a one-to-one approach. So for every product that we sold of the septic line cleaner, we would provide one unit to a community. Partnering with a nonprofit, we would provide some product to a community in need. With those later investors, they wanted to change the whole business model. And had they been really hostile, they would have prevented us from doing that altogether. Fortunately, we had some friendly investors and we were able to spin out that aspect of the business into sort of a separate approach to that. But the point is, once you bring on investors, they can really change your whole business model, how you're generating revenue. Sometimes it can be for better, sometimes it can be for worse, but it certainly puts at risk whatever your missional objective is. All right, so I'm going to get into B Corp a little bit. Now, before I start to talk about B Corps, let me just kind of separate. So a benefit corporation, that is a legal structure, and that is directed towards shareholder primacy. So the objective of benefit corporation incorporating as a benefit corp is to prevent really investors from coming in, from changing, from moving you away from the things that you want to prioritize as a social enterprise. B Corp, that's a business certification. That is a stamp that you get, a trust mark that you get for operating your business in a certain way. So oftentimes those things get confused. And I'll say for another day why they get confused, but it's just important to know that those are two separate concepts. You can become a B Corp as a solo enterprise, as an LLC. You don't have to be a corporation to get certified as a B Corp. So those are things to think about. Now, what is B Corp? So some of these slides are from B Corp, from B Lab itself, the certifying entity of B Corporation. So they're a little bit outdated, but it is about being a triple bottom line business. Social, environmental performance, transparency. You're audited by B Lab. That report is made available. They're actually looking at your company data to validate what you've done. So some of these different trust marks like LEED and Fair Trade, and these are trust marks, and they have different levels of evaluation and auditing, and that's what B Corp is. So again, an older slide, 2,100. I think there are now like 3,500 certified B Corps around the world. Here are some brands that you're going to recognize. There are some really, out front leaders in the space in terms of companies that we all respect, and who are taking the lead on this and investing in that sort of B Corp certification, which helps all of us little guys when they're out there and they're generating awareness around what that mark is. It helps all of us out if we choose to be a B Corp. I'm going to kind of skip through some of these. I'll share the deck. You can go look at this. But basically, the process is you apply through an assessment, and that assessment looks at your community engagement. How do you give money? Do you help the community? What do you do? How do you treat your employees? What are your policies around employment? What about your space? If you're operating in a space, do you have a green power plan? What are you recycling? What are you doing operationally? What about your supply chain? If you are selling products, is your supply chain, are you sourcing materials from companies that have some sort of ESG standards and pledges? It looks really across the board at how you operate your company. So some certifications out there, 1% for the planet is a good example. 1% for the planet, some of you know about, really just looks at, are you giving 1% of your revenue to environmental nonprofits? That is all just about, what do you give? And so B Corp looks holistically at how you operate your company. So here's an example of what you see when you go to B Lab, when you look at B Corps. These are the ways that a company is graded, and how they're scored, and whether they meet that sort of standard to be able to be a B Corp or not. And there are lots of consultants out there helping companies to become B Corps. There are academic organizations who help. One of our partners down south is NC State. They have a B Corp clinic where MBA students help companies to become B Corps, to generate the data, to look at their operations. So there's a lot of help out there for if you're looking at this and you think, wow, this is just a lot more that I think I can handle. A lot of resources out there to help you with this. What are some reasons that you would want to become a B Corp? Well, this is from B Corp. Different reasons why you would want to choose to pursue that certification. I will say that there are a couple of things that I see in terms of being a B Corp. So I mentioned earlier, B Corps themselves have a higher survival rate, even young companies, startup companies, than their peers across the country. There are opportunities if you're a supplier, to fit into that supply chain. Companies like Patagonia and others, they've made pretty strong public commitments where their supply chains, the companies in their supply chain, are all going to have really highly vetted commitments to ESG. And so being a B Corp is one way to fit into that supply chain. Discounts at the bottom. Honestly, we just ordered some apparel for all my employees from Patagonia, and there was a discount because we're a B Corp. So when you get into the network and you see all the discounts from other B2B companies, you're like, oh wow, this more than pays for anything that I'm spending on this. And talent. So one of our fellows is on the call within my law firm. Look, I operate a small law firm in the South. And we have a social impact fellow who's really smart guy, Princeton grad, went abroad. And one of the reasons why he's wanting to partner with our group is because of our commitment, because of our vetted commitment to change, to improving our community. And you really get talent across the board. Our attorneys, we get attorneys in who operating on our scale, we ordinarily wouldn't have access to, but they come in because of our mission and because we've been vetted. So talent attraction is probably the number one reason, I think, to be a B Corp from my personal experience and with the clients that we work with. So what are the cons? The common cons are heightened levels of scrutiny. So we have come across companies, we've worked with companies who could not choose the B Corp path because their investors did not want this kind of scrutiny. And that is one of the reasons why, if you want to commit to a model, a B Corp model, a benefit corporation model, you want to do that early on, really before you get investors, because it's much easier to change, to do things before you have significant investors. And under a lot of statutes, you can't change once you have investors without a pretty significant approval rate. So time and resource commitment, it does require some unique auditing. You're going to have to work with your CPA to look at things a little bit differently, and to start to approach things differently. So you can't just go onto Amazon and buy something really quickly for your office that's cheap and fast. You have to be a little bit more conscientious about how you're ordering things, and this potential sacrifice of near-term profits for long-term gain. And I would say that the cons of B Corp certification really do not stack up to the pros of them. So they're honest and they're there, but the pros far outweigh the cons. So while we're kind of talking about B Corp and benefit corporation, I kind of want to transition into trust marks a little bit, because trust marks, this B Corp is a trust mark. And you look at where we are this year with COVID and just with consumer behaviors, this is particularly relevant for e-commerce companies. You have Amazon hiring like crazy to adapt to how people are shopping. You've got retail stores that are really hurting. You've got just business models that are being upended. It's more important than ever to be in the digital space. And within that digital space, how do you message the things that you care about? And having trust marks are one way that you can show consumers who care about certain aspects of how a business should operate, that you're showing them that you meet that standard. So within our present environment, trust marks are more important than ever. Here's a Harvard Business Review study that I'm kind of citing over the next few slides that show, what we're dealing with in terms of how consumers are trying to vet one product or one company from another while they're engaging online. And these types of symbols are very, very important. And the data shows that they work and they mean something. It's important that your trust mark, you have a certain approach to how you use your trust mark. And the takeaway from this is, ESG investors often want evidence of impact, and trust marks can impact your story. It can make it easier to communicate. So these trust marks are really important, and so I champion them within that space, within the e-commerce space, within the intellectual property space. All right, so I'm going to transition a little bit. So I want to cover a few things today. I don't have a ton of time, but I do want to talk about IP, because I think everybody's always kind of interested in IP. For some of you as entrepreneurs, it matters, and as business owners, for some of you, it's less important. But I do think that there are certain aspects of IP that are more important within this sort of social enterprise space than others. So what's the environment that we're living in? So if you're an e-commerce company or if you're online, these are some things that are happening in the legal world right now. So copyright trolls. You may have heard of the term patent troll in the past. A patent troll is somebody who doesn't actually practice an invention. They've just acquired rights to a patent so they can go sue people. That's what we're seeing with copyright trolls. So when you're building your website and you're using what you think are open source images to go onto your website, we now have copyright trolls who are going around suing everybody for using images that they didn't have permission to, or maybe you did have permission to use it, but there was some fine print that you missed. Maybe you were supposed to provide a link back to the source you got it in, and because you didn't do that, you're going to get sued. So IP is out there. It's important to be very, very critical about what intellectual property assets that you're using. I'm giving a talk in a couple weeks at Purdue on open source licensing and blockchain. And in that space, for more high-tech companies, you've got issues with companies are building off of open source platforms, and they're adding to it in ways that are introducing vulnerabilities into consumer products, but are also mixing and matching all kinds of different open source licenses, where you're basically creating the potential for violating 20 different kinds of contracts by the way that you're building open source stuff, which is copyright protected, into your business. And so it's not just, hey, I want to have the logo with the little R, or nah, I'm not inventing anything, so I don't need to worry about intellectual property. Intellectual property is important to every aspect of your business. And the intellectual property, you got to kind of understand how does the chain work here. If I'm hiring somebody to build something, build an app, build my website, design some stuff for my product, have I secured proper contractual rights to that intellectual property? Do I own it? We've had situations where our clients have worked with a media company to build them some assets, but they didn't secure all the rights in their contract. And once they started to get kind of big, the developer of those materials, those skins, came back to them and said, pay us more, or we're going to sue you. And so it's a space you really need to be thinking about intellectual property from the beginning to make sure you have all the rights you need going forward for whatever you're doing. So some when we're working with somebody, the typical questions that come up around copyright, trademark protection, what are the difference between these things? What does it matter for me? I've heard about the Amazon brand registry. Is that something I need to think about? What do I need to do to get in there? Hey, I've got all these competitors on Google. They're always trying to undermine my ads and stuff. How does IP help me with that? What's good IP? What's bad IP? These are the typical questions that we would kick off with. IP fundamentals here, important things to know. There are I kind of say 4 different quadrants of IP. So you've got copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, and patents. The fundamental thing that all of them share, they're all different in some way, but they're not necessarily intellectual. I mean, intellectual property law is a derivative of property law. So if you understand, my New York friends, you don't understand backyards. I didn't really understand backyards when I lived in San Francisco. In the South, everybody has a backyard, right? So within your backyard, you've got this space that's yours, and you've had that space surveyed. So what's happening is the federal government is surveying your yard and telling you where your boundaries are in your yard. It's your responsibility to build the fence. If you don't want your neighbors or dogs or something coming into your yard, you have to build that fence and keep people out of your yard. And that's what you're doing with IP. It's not necessarily intellectual. Anybody can really understand it. If you understand the concept of, here's my thing, you can't take my thing, you can't come into my space, then you can understand all these different aspects of IP pretty easily from a business standpoint. They're not necessarily about the mind. Sometimes they're a little bit different. Sometimes you form an intellectual property right without actually producing it. It's just you've come up with something, it's totally in your head, bam, the right attaches right there while it's in your head. Sometimes you have to actually build something to have some sort of intellectual property rights. They're a little bit different, but the key concepts are it originates with someone or some group of ones, and it is something that is proprietary. Nobody else can take it once you've established that right. So these are the common things you might think about. Copyright, that's the sort of creative stuff. Trademark, that's the brand awareness. It's the source identifier. Patent, those are the widgets. And trade secrets, that's the sort of KFC recipe that's kept in the vault surrounded by lasers. And that's a true story. So in Kentucky, there is a vault surrounded by lasers with the KFC recipe. So, what's your baby? What is it? What is this IP thing that you have? So here are just a couple snapshots of IP up at the top there. One of my favorite patents in recent years. That is this is just a slide from an actual patent. So this is depicting when somebody gets hit by an autonomous vehicle, instead of the person flying off into a telephone pole, which would hurt them even worse after being hit by a car, they just stick to the hood of the car. So this is flypaper for the car, from everyone's do no evil friend Google. Down there in the bottom quadrant, you've got Mr. Lamar. There you've got copyright. You've got a lot of creativity going on. Corn might have all kinds of things. It might have patents and copyrights and trademarks. So, figuring out what is the thing that you have, how can you protect it and monetize it? Trademarks are the things that protect your brand. They're the names, the logos, the slogans. Smell, Plato's smell was trademarked, if you can believe that. So these are the things that they're your source identifier. Okay. We have this problem a lot right now in the social media space. So, hey, I've got my name, all these other companies are like hashtagging my name, and they're doing things, and they're confusing others about what my brand is and what my business is. How can I stop them from doing that? So trademark protection is one way to stop them from doing that. Creating a space for yourself that you can kind of bump people off. One cool thing about trademark is it's the law of confusion. So if you have a trademarked name, then you can use that trademark offensively against people who have similar sounding names. It doesn't have to be the same name. It doesn't have to be the same spelling. It's all about how close are they getting to my brand. And these things are super, super valuable. You look at some nonprofits out there. Let me throw one out. ARP, I think it's AARP, American Association of Retired Persons. Yeah, that thing. So they generate, it's in their financial reports, over $1 billion every year in licensing that trademark. All right. So trademarks can be insanely valuable to your company. But that right has to be locked up in order for you to appropriately monetize that right. Trademark, it's a source identifier. That's some legal stuff I don't need to get into. It can be all these different things, colors, logos, shapes, anything that you can say, this identifies my product or my service or my company, anything we do. Here's some examples of our trademarks. Company name, acronyms, slogans, all these things can be trademarked. Who actually trademarks? This is just kind of interesting. Here are some examples of people who are filing trademarks. Taylor Swift has over 240 trademark files with the PTO. So, things you wouldn't maybe expect. Why does Bank of America have so many more trademark files than Apple? Or some of these really brand conscious type of companies? Well, one reason is that banking, enterprise systems, those are boring industries. Those are industries where you don't have a whole lot of competitors. So these companies are constantly trying to come up with different marketing campaigns and products to try and energize you about what they do, because it's a really boring industry. So that's why you see a whole lot of trademark activity there, just because they can only be so exciting based upon what they're offering. So just kind of some interesting stuff in how trademarks play out. You don't want to choose one of these names. If you're trying to trademark something, usually when you see like 20,000 files with a word on it, that's bad. That's not really original or unique. You're probably wasting your money. You're not going to get a trademark on it. So just stay away from Ninja and Mega, and you should be pretty good. We have this little kind of approach to trademarks where the rad trademarks, we tend to think of them as the really random names, the Uber, the Squid, the Amazon, for things that are completely arbitrary and random and disassociated from whatever that service is. Media folks usually don't like that. They want you to choose something that's a little bit more descriptive about the service that you're offering. But ultimately, it's the rad trademark that's going to be the most powerful. All right. So, think about Google. If you went into a store and you saw a Google microwave in the aisle, you would undoubtedly think that Google got into the microwave business and wonder what all fun things that microwave does. All right. So that's because that name is so arbitrary and it can become so powerful that if you see that on any product, you're thinking it is the Silicon Valley company. Whereas if you have sort of a more suggestive or even a generic term, you have no idea whether that can be pointing to one particular company. So when you get down to a mad mark, like Paul's Popsicles, all right, so you can't really associate that with any particular company. It's too generic, and so it's unlikely to get trademark protection. So that's just kind of the analysis we like to run through. Again, likelihood of confusion, taking this in sort of practical terms, ways that you can enforce your trademark would be like likelihood of confusion with a source or a relationship. Like, I guess their name is a lot like this other one, so they must have gotten permission to come across that way. Or dilution could be if you have a credible brand name and some upstart comes along, some maverick company is really shooting from the hip and has a similar sounding name, that bigger company can attack the smaller one for dilution. Hey, they're watering down our brand. And this is something we see that a lot of these big time companies who are super, super aggressive in their trademark protection are often going after the small guys based on dilution, based on saying, hey, you're a little too close to us, and we don't want you creating some potential that people are going to confuse whether we have a relationship or think that one of our products is kind of silly because of something that you've done. Difference between copyright and trademark. I'm going to run through this stuff really quickly because I think I'm kind of getting close to the hour mark. And let me just take a second to say, pop any questions you have into the chat box. One of the things that I'm going to do is in sending out sort of our little social enterprise list of fun articles and just good resources for you, I'm going to try and address all your questions. And just please make them anonymized so you're not revealing any sort of confidential information. But if you've got some general questions on stuff I haven't covered, throw them in the chat box, and when we send out a follow-up, we'll try and address all those questions. So copyright is the thing that protects creative works. And it can be a lot of different things. Copyright can apply to your logos, to a software, thanks to some legislation in the 80s, any graphic user interfaces, organization of data. This is kind of a fun area. So raw data, you can't really protect raw data, but you can protect how it's organized. So if you're thinking about, man, like I'm generating cool data sets or have access to cool data sets, can I keep others from using that? The way that you package those can be protected. That's why you have companies who fight about when you go and you check into a doctor's office and you have to fill out a little intake form. Companies fight about that, like, oh, that you stole my intake form. All right, so that's because that's copyright protected. It's organization of data, and that kind of stuff can be very valuable. And so copyright can be a sledgehammer when it comes to your lawyer. And we don't need to get too far into this, but basically, copyright is a real, there's statutory protections. You don't have to prove like, oh, somebody violated my copyright, I have to prove how much it cost me. You just have to prove that they violated it, and you can take them to court and claim these damages. And one area this has played out in the music business is the music model has changed from 15 years ago when people bought CDs, right? So now you've got streaming. Now publishing companies are trying to figure out, how do we make our money? And one area where you've seen a business model actually develop is, I like to call them spies. So spies who go out to bars and listen, what's this bar or restaurant playing? If they have an open mic night, the person who's playing at the open mic, are they playing any of the songs that our publishing house owns? And if they find that somebody who participated in the open mic night sang a song that was protected by their publishing house, they're actually suing the bars. And the bars and restaurants who have fought this have had to go out of business because they've lost $1.5 million, $2 million suits because some dude from down the street came in and played 3 songs that were from the 70s. This is like crazy stuff, but that's because copyright protection is so strong. So really thinking about ways to monetize your business, copyright protection is a really good one. So let me kind of get through here, because I want to kind of go here to the end. I want to talk. I had in the presentation scope that I want to talk a little bit about employment and privacy as well. So obviously we have 2 presidents right now, but one of the other things that came out of the election was that California passed a new law prop around how independent contractors are seen in the state. And so there have been fights in California for several years now on is someone an employee or an independent contractor? And that has huge ramifications, not only for what you have to offer to employees in terms of benefits and privileges and what you have to pay in taxes, but also what your ownership is of their work product and how intellectual property floats up the food chain. And so with the gig economy, which has made, lots of really neat products and business models off of using independent contractor workforces within that space, and also within the era of COVID, where companies are trying to figure out what to do with employees. Okay, we're paying all this rent in our corporate space, but nobody's working here, so we're going to send everybody home. Oh, why don't we just go ahead and tweak their statuses while we're at it? And they're no longer employees, but they're independent contractors. All of these things are really, really important right now. California just passed a law around whether someone should be considered an independent contractor or an employee, that modifies somewhat some of the changes in the law the last couple of years. So as California goes, so goes the country a lot of times. So that's something to think about in terms of, as you're organizing your business, being really mindful of, if you're bringing somebody on, how are you treating them? Are you treating them, let's say you want to get around, you're a small business, you want to get around some employment requirements, and you're treating them as an independent contractor. Well, if it's found out that they're actually not an independent contractor and they're an employee, then you're going to get hit with some pretty heavy fines. You're going to have to pay some back taxes. If you think that, or if you have an independent contractor and you assume that whatever they're producing, your company owns, if they're not an employee, that's not necessarily the case. So maybe you're losing important intellectual property because that individual employee owns it all. They can go work for another company and take your stuff or create their own competitive company. So it's really important to kind of understand, am I dealing with employees or independent contractors, and what that's all about? And the other important space for, I think, social enterprises right now is data regulation. So we've got these things, y'all probably heard, the GDPR, the CCPA. What are these things? Why do they matter? Also in the election, California passed another proposition around protecting information. It's more than just sticking a privacy policy on your website. It is really, really important to understand that privacy law is coming for you. All right. So there are more and more controls over the data you can get from your customers, how you protect that data. That means your employment policies, because if you are being too careless with the data you're collecting and somehow storing of consumer information, and maybe you don't have good two-factor authentication processes or good security processes all around within your business, and that information leaks, you can be liable not only for federal litigation, individual litigation under these different privacy statutes as well, but also just thinking about, oh, I see a really cool opportunity where I'm going to be intentional about, I've grabbed this data set from my consumers. I can find a third party where I can sort of monetize that in a different way. If you don't have permissions to do that, then you're opening yourself up to privacy law violations as well. So understanding that we're coming into an era of increasing sophistication around users understanding that I'm giving up important data that I don't want disclosed out there or used or monetized without my permission. And then there's more regulation in place. So there's going to be a whole lot of stuff around data privacy regulation. These are my founder's tips to kind of close with here. Pivot with purpose. So just a quick backstory. So I entered law school to be an environmental lawyer. I wanted to go practice land stewardship law, protect the natural lands, go work for Sierra Club. And then the last environmental crisis, or last financial crisis, 2008 housing crisis, we went into the recession. All those jobs were off the table. So I pivoted. I got into renewable energy technology. I followed a career in technology. I was able to come back to what I cared about, which was doing things in a way that could impact the environment through a business under this B Corp model. It's important. So if you have to pivot, always keep in mind kind of what your core motivation is in the business world, because you may have an opportunity to come back to that and have a little bit more control over what you're doing. Understanding who works for who in terms of what you're doing and what your goals are. We see this all the time. So many companies are formed on handshakes, friends who want to continue being besties and they don't want to introduce any legal stuff into their relationships. And then there's a dispute. And then it's just a mess. All right. So have some contracts. It's even writing stuff on a napkin. I would, as a lawyer, if you came to me and you said, we don't have contracts, we have this stack of napkins. We were at Burger King one day and we just wrote our whole relationship plan down here on these napkins. I would be happier with that than nothing at all, because you at least have some structure and some understanding within your business about what you're supposed to be doing. That also applies to your investors. You're bringing investors on. You want to have some structure around that. When you start dealing with taking on investment, promising things, giving some equity to somebody who's going to build you a new app or something, the SEC governs all of that. And if you're not doing that correctly, it's not just about some government person is going to come knocking on your door, because that's really not going to happen. They don't operate that way. But as you go to raise sophisticated institutional capital down the road, they are going to be doing their due diligence, kicking your tires. And if it looks like you've been haphazard with the SEC, that's going to devalue your company and your business proposition with them. So make sure that you're doing things that you need to be doing. If you're raising money, do a little reading into what you need to do with the SEC. Sometimes it's as simple as just filing like a simple document that takes you 15 minutes, but you've at least done what you need to do so you're not going to raise questions down the road. You're protecting your business. Just as if we have entrepreneurs on the call, kudos to you. I've lived in other places in the world. I've hosted delegations from other places in the world, where there are very, very risk averse societies. We are in a risk tolerant society. If what you're doing doesn't catch the first time, don't give up. You are just as likely to be funded on your 6th or 7th company or iteration, because you're smarter and better at what you're doing. And so you have more potential there. So, if you've got the entrepreneurial bug, keep with it and stick with it, even if, whatever your current product or business plan is doesn't actually pan out. So that's my presentation. And I think I'm going to kind of pull the chat box up here, just to kind of see what we've got and see if there's anything I can address right now. And thank you all very much. So I am going to circulate a great resource list for social enterprises, and try and address all these questions in a way that would benefit everybody, to be able to see these kind of an anonymized way for what you want to think about. So let me just kind of jump from the bottom. So if you form a non-benefit corp in which to change to a benefit corp, aside from a filing fee, and are there other switching costs involved if there are still no investors in the company at the point it wishes to make the switch? Thinking whether it makes more sense to form a new benefit corp rather than switching the existing model. So that is a good question. Some of that, so just take a step back, from a high level view, if you have existing investors and you're trying to change your structure, that's a lot more complicated, because you have to get your shareholders to approve something. And sometimes that means having these formal notices and, these formal votes. And so pre-investor, you have a lot more flexibility with what you can do. You may run into issues where by forming a new corporation, you're going to get a new EIN. Sometimes we've seen that wreak havoc with companies if they have any sort of contracts or approvals. So let's say you are a provider to a business and it took you a long time to get into their system and improved within their business. By changing your structure, you might get booted out of their system. So that could be a big problem and a big cost to you. See that in the federal space all the time. it's really, really difficult if you've gotten into some sort of federal procurement system to just change your structure, because you're going to get booted if you have, some different DUNS numbers or EIN numbers. But generally, if all of that is not an issue, then you may be better off reincorporating versus sort of starting all over again. So the main things there would just be your investors, any contractual arrangements you have or relationships you've already developed. Even the relationships, those are business assets, and so there are legal points to those. They're typically require some sort of documented assignment. So if you've received intellectual property from someone or some benefit from someone, that goes to the company. If you form a new company, you may have to do some formal assignment of those rights that you've received, even if it's been very informal. So thinking about that in those terms. Contact info. So my Calendly. So that's a good way to set some time up with me. So I think I'm at Calendly/Kevin-RVL or Kevin@rockridgelaw.com, an email address for me. Let's see. So what is the right time in a company's maturity to file for copyrights, LLC status, B Corp, etc.? Okay, so those are some different things there. I would say you want to file for intellectual property protection after you have started the business, because it's going to be cleaner for the IP to be owned by the company, especially if you're looking at getting investors down the road or ever selling that business. The more contracts and permissions and assignments that you introduce, particularly from individuals to the company, just the more due diligence points that creates. So if you can start the company and then file for protections, then you should do that. If the protection has already been created before the company ever existed, then you may have to file some formal assignments to those rights. But it's always good for the company to own all of that stuff outright, rather than some sort of permissions being created from an individual owner or a group of individual owners to the company. In terms of what's the right time in the company's maturity to file for those things. So some of this involves taxation questions. So LLC status versus B Corp. If you're just starting out, if you don't ever intend to raise private equity investment, you're not looking to actually kind of bring on investors, LLC is the easiest thing to do. In most states, the limited liability company structure is really friendly. You don't have to do a lot of formal, you don't have to be very, very precise in terms of having minutes surrounding your decisions, or creating notices or creating good corporate handbooks. I mean, it's always good to do anyway, but with LLCs, they're just a lot more flexible with what you can do. And you can still, you could be an LLC as your legal structure and an S Corp as your tax structure. And that introduces some other benefits, particularly if you're a single member LLC. So if you're a single member LLC, filing as an S Corp in terms of taxation, you can realize some tax benefits over just being a sole proprietor. So those are some things to think about. You may want to do it specifically around what your tax intention is there. B Corp it's a business certification. So if you want to be an LLC and you're intending to become a B Corp as an LLC, B Corp requires at least a year of data for their certification. So what you could do, November 5th, I'm going to set up as an LLC today. I'm going to file. You can usually do that electronically with your state. It's really easy in most cases. And on the same day, I'm going to apply to be a B Corp. Now, what B Lab is going to say is you don't have a year of data for us to audit you. So we can't we can't determine if you're operating your business according to a triple bottom line model because you don't have any data to support anything. But we'll give you pending B Corp status, and in taking the assessment, you know what they're looking for. You know the way they want you to operate your business. So you go ahead and apply, you go through the process, and you understand, oh, okay, well, when I'm ordering products, this is how I need to order them. When I'm hiring people, this is the way I need to hire them. These are the policies I need to have in place. These are the ways I need to think about operating my company. And you know that from the outset, from day one. So I think that's a really good way to approach it is, start your LLC, go ahead and apply, so that you just have better control and understanding over what that assessment is going to look like within a year when you can be certified. So let's see. Benefit corporation. Let's see what happened in that lawsuit. So I think that's referring to the lawsuit of the director who sued because other directors were being paid. It was settled like most litigation was. So there's a settlement and everybody agrees that it was nobody's fault. But it was just important because these benefit corporation statutes, they really haven't been legally tested. All of us corporate attorneys are assuming that if you're organized under a benefit corporation statute and you're complying with the statute, that if you need to defend somebody, that you're gonna make out on top. Now, the compliance issue is where companies run into trouble. So we just finished kind of a little research project in Tennessee where we're looking at the Tennessee Benefit Corporation statute. One of the requirements in that statute is whatever you claim is your public benefit, and Tennessee is another one of these southeastern states that, unlike New York and some of you sophisticated states up north, where the public benefit is an aggregate of environmental, social, all stakeholder kind of purpose. In the South, you can kind of cherry pick. Oh, I care about education, I care about religion, and I'm going to operate my business that way. The requirement within the Tennessee Benefit Corporation statute for transparency is that every year, at the end of the year, you have to publish a narrative and with some specifics about what you did during the course of the year to further your public benefit. And we found that there was less than 1% compliance in the state of Tennessee for those companies publishing that information. So if you're not being compliant under the statute and you're trying to use that statutory protection as enforcement or in any way to protect your social enterprise mission, then you could run into problems. And so that is one thing that I think has been overlooked. And when these benefit corporation structures are going to start coming under fire, that's going to be one of the targets is, okay, well, maybe you were certified, but did you actually perform according to the requirements for maintaining that protection? So something to think about there. All right, so let me see. I got a question about trademarking social impact ninjas. Maybe, I don't know. So here's the thing with trademark law. So you can also argue that the combination of common words is unique and impressive, but we just say stay away from them because the more generic your terms are, the harder they are to enforce. Now, let me just say that is from if I put my litigation hat on, that's what I'm going to say. Just getting any trademark is important for one, customs enforcement. So if you get a trademark and you file your trademark with the customs office, U.S. Customs Border Control, they will actually enforce that trademark. If there are products coming from overseas and they find your logo stamped on some stuff that your company's not involved in, they'll actually enforce it. They will enforce criminal proceedings. They'll let you know about that. We've actually had we had a client who was I'm not going to name the company, but let's say all the company's products are made in China in a warehouse or group of warehouses, and this particular individual purchased those products from Alibaba directly from that factory. So they were just selling them out the back door on Alibaba with the stamps. And this person was selling them at flea markets all over the Southeast. The company had these trademarks filed with customs, and so customs eventually caught this individual. And so that's where somebody else is doing the policing for you. Remember, you're building the fence and you've got to keep people out, but there are certain ways where others will patrol those fences for you. So customs is one, and Amazon brand protection is the other. So if you have a trademark and you file it with Amazon brand protection, or you qualify to be in that program, they're going to do some of that policing for you. And to them, it's not really about how strong the trademark is, or whether it could be litigated successfully. It's about, did you get a trademark? And so in those instances, I would say that how good the trademark is, it doesn't matter as much. It's just the fact that you have that asset that you can use in certain instances. Let's see. So, the Purdue lecture, I will in the resource follow up. I'll share that as well. That's going to be a fun panel. I'll be talking about the sort of the legal side. We've got somebody who heads up United Health, so an insurer that has created a whole open source program department, and so he heads up that program. So when the healthcare group is acquiring companies, they're doing open source due diligence, they're productizing their own open source platforms. They have a dedicated unit around that, which is actually kind of unique in major businesses. So he's going to be a great guest panel. There are professors on that, so I'll send that link as well. So I think that I should invite Jen back in to just kind of wrap this up. I'm so honored that some of you stayed around and hung through my technical difficulty on this. And awesome community, awesome thing that you're doing, Jen. And so thanks again. We'll send you some follow-ups.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I learned so much personally, and I know that we had over 20 people stick around because they too were learning and really enjoyed what you had to share. We will, again, send a follow-up email with lots of the content that Kevin mentioned. If you are a Be Social Change member, you'll be able to access the recording. If not, you can become one for $5 a month, $49 a year. And one other thing that we'll be sure to include in the follow-up email is that we're also hosting a social enterprise connector this month for social enterprises to come together to do facilitated networking and hear from leaders from B Corp, from B Lab, about the movement. So join us on November 19th. Hope to see you there. And thank you again to Rockridge Venture Law. Thank you, Kevin. So appreciate your partnership and your work. God, this was informative, and I can't wait to do it again soon. Have a great one, everyone.